Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Film Club Podcast, where every month we deep dive into a different aspect of cinema, director, genres, actors, or franchise. It doesn't matter because it's always fun at the Film Club. I'm Dean.
I'm Boo.
And this month we have a new theme, and we are going to be talking about a director, a famous director, possibly the worst director of all time.
Dean's favorite director.
Dean's absolute favorite, Ed Wood Jr. That's right, this is Ed Wood month, and where better to start than his first film,
Glen or Glenda.
That's right, Glen or Glenda, 1953, stars Ed Wood himself and Bela Lugosi. And
I think it stars Bela Lugosi and then Ed Wood.
It's hard to say this stars Bela Lugosi because he is in a completely different movie than the movie Ed Wood is in.
He is, but I mean, if you're going to go top billing.
I mean, he does open the film.
And appears every now and then.
But yeah, we're going to be talking about Ed Wood. This month is kind of inspired by our mutual love of the Ed Wood movie that Tim Burton did that we reviewed
Last December.
It was the first time we both saw it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And leading up to that movie, I watched like Plane 9 from Outer Space. I think I watched Glen or Glenda then and Bride of the Monster. But, you know, watching it, I'm like, oh man, like this movie, this guy has such a love for film and this and that. Johnny Depp is just so dreamy in that movie.
Of course.
So we were like, let's do a whole Ed Wood month. And I think there's a underlying idea that I think I want to approach here, because Ed Wood famously is considered the worst director of all time, right?
That's what the rumors say.
That's what the rumors say. But my idea is I want to figure out if that's true, and also what actually makes a bad director, because we watched Glen or Glenda.
Mm-hmm.
Glen or Glenda is a very strange film.
Yes.
I would say it's not a very well-made film.
No.
I would also say it's incredibly fascinating, and it has a vision. The guy making this movie knows what he's making, but I don't think anyone else knows what the fuck is going on in this.
I mean, apparently it's one of, David Lynch's favorite movies, so I guess somebody understands it.
Which fucking tracks, by the way. The weird dream sequence in the middle of the movie that goes on for, like, most of the middle of the movie feels like something out of a David Lynch movie. The fact that, like, the devil shows up, then Ed Wood turns into a woman, and also there's, like, a tree that has fallen onto Barbara inside of the house. And
yeah, I mean, there's some things that happen in this movie where I'm just like, oh, that's kind of fucked up. And then it's like, oh, really? Glenda can't lift a tree off of Barbara? Really?
So sexist.
I'm like, a woman can't, help another woman? No, he's got to be, Glen to remove the fucking tree. The tree that appeared from where? Where did this tree come from?
It's a dream sequence. They got married at some point in the dream. And then the weird bondage S&M part shows up, which is a whole other can of worms.
You gonna do this when we get married, or leading up to it? You're gonna be like, oh my god, I'm having nightmares about trees landing on Boo, and, will I be able to lift the tree off of her? I don't know.
I know I could lift a tree off of you, I swear, but could you lift a tree off of me? I mean, Little Miss Female with her frilly hats and nice dresses, will she be able to?
Do you want me to lunge across the desk and get you right now?
I'm quoting the film, all right? Which, by the way, this movie has some very weird like language it uses, and it's like the dialogue's very strange, and I don't know if that's because it's from 1953.
What, like the medical dialogue?
Well, some of the one of the movie's just wordy as hell. Like there's a lot of medical jargon, like that are some scientific fact and pseudoscience, but it's also the thing where, like I said, there's the whole opening montage bit where somebody's narrating. It's like, and men there going bald because they're wearing hats. But women, Little Miss Female over there is wearing her nice frilly hats, and women don't go bald.
I mean,
Direct line of the movie.
Direct line, but I think, Bella was kind of spitting facts here, because you're wearing a hat today, so maybe you're trying to hide a bald spot that I haven't seen yet.
Oh, totally. If anybody ever sees me in public, they should, check the back of my head to see if there's any bald spots.
Yeah, I'm going to tell them, pull the strings.
oh, run from the little dragon on the porch. It comes to eat little boys. We legitimately could quote line for line from this movie, and it would sound like the ravings of a madman. For like, because I would say because it's out of context, right? But even in context, not a lot of it makes sense. But we're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into it.
I mean, I think you're getting a little angry out of this out of context stuff when this movie was only made in 4 days.
Yes.
Sorry, it was only filmed in 4 days.
Only filmed in 4 days. Like,
possibly edited 4 days too.
We have to get into like how this becomes a thing. Like, okay, we did some research on Ed Wood the man when we did the Ed Wood movie right back in December, and I did a little bit of looking to like refresh my memory, and I was trying to figure out how the hell he ends up directing Glen or Glenda. I'm just trying to figure that out. And it's a thing where I guess he had been like bumming around Hollywood just doing odd jobs. Like he was an extra on a bunch of westerns. He shot some like the cheapest of cheap kind of commercials you can find, educational films.
The best time to be bumming around Hollywood because, you could, roll onto a backlot and yeah, sure, I'll be an extra for this movie, an extra for that movie.
Oh, you have 2 hands and you're like competent. Okay, you can be an on-set carpenter and then you just work for 30 years. Like that's
the dream. I mean, now you have to get an education and you have to be certified and qualified.
You have to have connections.
But
that it's kind of weird, right?
You can't pull a Spielberg where you just hop off the back of the tram tour and then I'm gonna teach myself and I'm gonna learn and do this. I'm like, I would love to do that.
You know what broke my heart of having the veil lifted was it turns out that Spielberg kind of lied about doing that. He was like, no, yeah, that I'm ruining everyone's dreams here. He didn't actually I just snuck onto the back lot, every weekend and did that. It was more like, yeah, I got away with it for once, and I did wander on the back lot and no one noticed, but after that I never did it again because they recognized who I was.
The legend is ruined. I wanted to envision that Spielberg was the Indiana Jones, this belongs in a museum.
He says, holding up Marlon Brando's Oscar that he uses as a doorstop.
I mean, he wasn't wrong. This belongs in a museum.
Belongs in a museum. But, okay. Ed Wood. So, from my understanding, he's bumming around Hollywood, and then the Christine Jorgensen story breaks. And for those who don't know, Christine Jorgensen was an incredibly famous transgender person in the late 1940s, early 1950s. Yeah. Christian Jorgensen was a World War II veteran who, while they were overseas, found out about the medical procedures for gender affirming surgery, gender reassignment surgery, and they did it, and the media picked it up, and it became a very big thing. Christine Jorgensen became a rather known singer and actress, and it was kind of the tabloid story of the day.
She became a household name.
Yeah, I don't think it was on the level of Lucille Ball, but if you watch tabloids or whatever, you would know who Christian Jorgensen is, at least in the day.
Late 40s, early 50s, your newspaper was your social media.
Yes. So Christine Jorgensen's story becomes a thing, and the producer of this wanted to make a real quick and dirty exploitation film. And that was the whole basis. They were like, we just want to make a movie that is dirt cheap about Christine Jorgensen because it's hot and it's in the news. Unfortunately, Christine Jorgensen told them to go fuck themselves because they wanted very little money for her story.
Yeah.
So he was like, okay, well, fuck you and fuck the horse you rode in on. I'm going to make it on my own with blackjack and hookers. And the only person they could get to direct it was Ed Wood, who had some skin in the game, we'll say.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, he's been around, worked, kind of accruing some connections.
Well, it wasn't just that. It was also because, and this is a known thing, is Ed Wood was a very prolific cross-dresser. I think the term used in the film and at the time, and I think is still a technical term, is transvestite, which he and Ed Wood is very clear in any interview, any interactions he ever had with anybody, and from all accounts he just enjoyed being in women's clothing, and he had a desire to, it's vague if he had a desire to be a woman. I don't think people are sure if he was truly transgender or if he was just,
I think he just enjoyed being in women's clothing.
like, he had a desire to be to appear like a woman. But from every account, it was not a sexual thing. Like, he was a pretty prolific womanizer and was very much like, he knew exactly which way his wind blew. But yeah, Ed Wood really took to the story, and that is kind of why the Christian Jorgensen story is the last 10 minutes of Glen or Glenda.
Yeah.
And the other, like, 50 minutes, because this movie's only an hour and some change.
Oh, yeah, it goes by very fast.
Yeah.
I thought about watching it twice.
I did watch it twice.
Well, of course you did, but I mean, you do that with most of these movies. Oh, this movie was 4 hours long. Again,
pull the strings. I watched it once all the way through, and then I just put it on again in the background while I was doing something.
I mean,
and that was almost a better way to do it.
Because, I mean, the first time I was trying to watch it, someone just would not stop texting me. Like, oh my God.
She hates when I text her about kittens and puppies.
Cause, like, I'm trying to, immerse myself in the cinema, and you're just like, sup?
You have probably warmed Ed Wood's soul when you called his movies cinema. I want to be immersed in the cinema. But yeah,
I mean, Bela Lugosi's in it. It's cinema.
Yes, which a whole other thing, but we can get into it. That's how this movie comes to be made. Is Ed Wood manages to squeeze into this director role, and he's gonna make it. And Ed Wood is like, you giving me basically carte blanche as long as I put in the Christian Jorgensen semi-story somewhere. And the producer's like, yeah, whatever. It's a B picture. I've already sold it. You have this much money. Do whatever the fuck you want. Just make it cheap and make it quick. Does it in 4 days. And when the movie starts, we see probably one of the bargaining chips that Ed Wood used to get the director role is Mr. Bela Lugosi, who is playing, I don't know...
The
scientist, who is in a spooky room playing with his chemistry set and saying very cryptic things.
I mean, I was listening to him, I'm watching it, and, I paused it, and I'm like, just him in that room is iconic. You have the full skeleton in the background, you have him with, the vials and the chemicals. I'm like, this is very Bela Lugosi horror icon. Like, this could be its own movie. Him as the scientist.
This is funny you say that. This feels like its own movie.
Yeah.
It feels like Ed Wood... Okay, because... I think this is a thing that I equate to Ed Wood, and especially this movie, is outsider art. And have you heard the term, like, an outsider artist before? Okay. For those who don't know, like, the outsider artist is somebody who's, like, not a trained artist that works within a medium, right? And Ed Wood strikes me as that, but for film. Like, he seems like a guy who really loved movies, who saw a lot of movies, but didn't really understand how movies worked. And it feels like he was like, I want to make like a really cool, iconic Bela Lugosi thing. We'll make him a mad scientist, and we'll be in the spooky room with like skeletons, and then we'll make the story of me coming to terms with my own cross-dressing, and then the Christian Jorgensen. It feels so like disjointed. It feels alien from the rest of the movie.
And then we're gonna show animal scenes. We're gonna show traffic in downtown LA. We're going to show war scenes.
They get so much, like, mileage out of that traffic shot in LA.
I mean, look, one of the boring things about me, or at least I find this boring about myself, I like to watch, like, these old, like, home videos on YouTube where it's, like, Hollywood in the 1950s, and it was someone that was sitting passenger in a car and was just recording the streets. People walking down the streets, the cars going by. I love that shit. I love the Hollywood ones, the downtown LA, the Burbank ones, just to see, how things haven't changed, and just to see,
how much has changed, how much hasn't changed.
Exactly. It's like, I love, seeing everybody in their outfits and the cool cars, and, it's like, oh, you could go to downtown LA and that building's still there. I'm like, that's fucking awesome. So it's like, so it was cool to see it, but then we keep seeing that shot with City Hall in the background and the cars going by and my mom's work.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, hey, there's my mom's work. And then it was just like, oh my God, we've seen this piece like 5 times already now.
Yes.
It's like, okay, it was cool like maybe the first 2 times, but it's like...
Which is kind of the thing I'm kind of getting at, is that Ed Wood seems like a guy who was passionate about movies, but didn't really totally grasp how movies worked. There's so much stock footage in this, and some of it kind of works. Like the war footage kind of works together. But there's also stuff where I'm like, this really feels like he's like, they're going to get the idea when I throw this stock footage in here, and they'll figure it out. It's
also a thing where I guess the movie wasn't long enough, so the producer was like, you know, the stock footage with like all the racy scenes and some of the fucked up scenes were kind of like, we don't have enough space, or we don't have enough content. We just got to, you know, I guess maybe repeat things or put more of that stuff in here to make it kind of, you know, a fuller film.
Which is so strange, because I know the sequence you're talking about that it explicitly was added by the producers, which is in the dream sequence. There's like a racy kind of like burlesque bondage number, which this was made for like drive-ins, so it's like, okay, you're gonna go see the Glen or Glenda trans movie. Okay, maybe there'll be some racy stuff because I'm a teenager in 1953. I'm looking for tits, right? And that may be it, but I'm thinking, like, how long was this movie before that was in there? Fucking 45 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, it's... I keep wanting to say, oh yeah, you know, the first half of the movie, and it's like, well, no.
There's no halves of this movie.
No, there's not. It's just, you're kind of just speed running through it.
Like, let's even, like, try and get into that, okay? How would you even describe the structure of this movie? It's almost stream of consciousness after a while.
I mean, it kind of feels like you're lucidly dreaming.
Oh, that is a perfect description of this movie. It really does feel like we're kind of just inside somebody's dream and we don't really understand what's going on. I'm going to keep flickering my fingers when I do that to add drama. You're doing
some weird finger movements. I'm like, are you okay?
I'm adding some drama. Pull these strings. But yeah, it's so weird how the movie flows, because we begin with this Bela Lugosi kind of nightmare-y kind of sequence. He talks over stock footage as he talks about like creation and God and life, but it's not that... I wouldn't even say it's like not profound. It's just almost incoherent.
I mean, considering he's not even a narrator, it'd be, you know, one thing where it's like, oh, cool, we have, you know, the cool spooky narrator. It's just, no, he's the scientist, but he doesn't tie into the story completely.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, he's going to cross paths with Glen or Glenda.
Well, he kind of does at the end, but it's not in a way that makes sense.
When Glen comes into the room?
Yeah, and then Lugosi has him disappear. That's why, like, Lugosi has a vibe of being like this omnipotent god figure, but I don't know if that was I feel like that was the intent, but I don't know if that was what I was supposed to get out of it. Because, again, he's credited as the scientist, right? But he has this feeling of being a god figure that overlooks everything and is kind of pulling the strings. He says it in the movie. But that's a thing that happens, and Lugosi reappears periodically throughout the movie with no real rhyme or reason. But once we get past that, we kind of get into the meat of the story, or the inciting incident, the thing that's going to push us into what we're here for. Yeah. And that is when a detective comes into the apartment of... we're not sure if they're a transgender person or if they're just a cross-dressing person, but somebody has committed suicide.
I think from the note, it's more or less, it's a person that just enjoys cross-dressing. Because I think they explain, you know, this is something that I've had to hide, and, you know, I've gotten in trouble for doing this, and you're not going to take this away from me in death. I will always be this version of myself that I enjoy being. So it's like, okay, so...
Which, by the way...
It's heartbreaking.
Also, for 1953, that is, like, progressive as hell.
That's why I was sitting there. I'm like, not that I had a lot of time to sit there, because this movie is fast.
Yeah, I mean it's both very fast and sluggish at the same time.
I mean, I also watched it on Tubi, so I got hit with some with some ads that kind of slowed me down for, a few minutes here or there.
Oh God, it's like, oh my God, they killed themselves. Welcome to Applebee's, ladies and gentlemen. You get hit with those.
Yeah, and it's just like, no, don't take me out of this moment. And, you're hitting me in the feels. I'm like, this is very heavy. And that
also, everybody, if you ever want to just ruin your night, watch Schindler's List on Tubi.
No.
When Liam Neeson's like, I could have saved so many. Oh, I could. And it's the Oscar clip. And then it just hard cuts into, welcome to Sleep Number Mattresses. You need yours tonight. It is the worst mood killer of any streaming service.
It's like that time that you told me you were going to watch Schindler's List for the first time. And I told you don't do it because I don't remember what you had watched the previous day. It was another drama.
I think so.
And you were still feeling kind of, in the dumps about that. And you're like, I'm going to watch it. I'm like, don't. I'm like, you need some time to, and even then, you're still going to feel, like your soul was ripped out of your body. And then you got out of there and you're just like, what did I do to myself? Like, exactly.
That movie is amazing, but yeah, it is heavy as fuck.
That's why, watching this movie, I was like, yeah, this is the early 1950s. This is so progressive. This is so, just rip your heart out because it's like, yeah, why are people being treated this way for just, doing something that feels right to them? And they're not hurting anybody.
And that's also the thing. It's also a thing where Ed Wood, because this movie has almost like a docudrama kind of feel, where the psychologist or whatever, they're talking, because the detective is like, I need to understand why this person would do this. I need to understand, like, this thing with transvestitism and this and that, and goes to a psychologist, and this psychologist tells them about their patients, Glen or Glenda. But the psychologist also makes the note of, this is not a new thing. This is a thing that happens all over the world to every kind of person. It's a thing that just is, and our society is what's oppressing it. It's not a thing that our society is. It's not a thing where it's like our society is creating this. This has always been, but our society is pushing it down, and that is causing issues within this community. And that's a thing where I'm like, this is 1950 fucking 3. Like, I don't think you could. I think being homosexual is still illegal in England at this point. In like some countries, like yes, that's like a real thing. I don't think you could.
In this day and age? Or are you talking about in the 50s?
In the 50s, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I think it wasn't until the 80s.
Like, I don't think so.
No, that was like a real thing. Being homosexual in England, I think, was illegal until like the 80s. Like a real thing. You can go to jail for it. But again, besides the point, it's just a thing where it's incredibly progressive for a movie of this era, and it's also a thing where I applaud Ed Wood for being that, because it's incredibly like sincere and kind as it's going through its messaging and its stories, and it's not even like so on the nose. He's trying to present it as very like matter of fact, factual. I'm telling you this story, but you can see the politics like on the wall here. But then we get into the Glen or Glenda story, which stars Ed Wood as Glen or Glenda. And the whole gist of this section of the movie is Glen is going to marry Barbara, and he hasn't told her that he's a crossdresser. And it's a thing that's weighing on him because he's like, I should tell her. This is a thing I can't hide anymore, and yada, yada, yada. Whole drama ensues. But could you make any sense of the flow of events going on here?
Because we're everywhere. We're just bouncing around that it's kind of hard to tell, where are we in the timeline?
Yeah, because it's also a thing where it intersperses like these dreamy sequences, and we jump back out to the psychologist section, and it feels like this movie was cut together the best they could. It feels like they shot like 4 or 5 different like plots or stories. And then when they got to the editing bay, they had no real strong way to structure it. Because we bounce out of the Glen or Glenda story to talk about, like, men's hats and women's fashion. And then we bounce back into Bela Lugosi having a fucking grand old time talking about whatever the fuck Bela Lugosi's talking about. And then we go back to the Glen or Glenda story. And, like, I feel for the plight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a thing where Glen's like, I love Barbara.
Yep.
I have no, like, I'm not homosexual. I love her because I'm a man and she's a woman. But I have this very deep ingrained desire to dress and appear and act as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea if she will be accepting of that. And that's
And if she'll leave me.
And if she'll leave me, and what, I don't know if I can go on. And he meets other people who are like him, and they're like, yeah, you know, my wife left. You know, I was hanging out in her silk stockings, and she came home early from probably not work. It's 1953, so the grocery store.
The market, unfortunately.
Yeah, you know. And she was like, ooh, you rapscallion, and divorced me. And it's a thing where he's really trying to humanize this story because it's very personal to Ed Wood, because Ed Wood is playing Glen, or Glenda, and Barbara is played by, I think, his then wife,
his girlfriend.
Her last name's Fuller. I forget her first name.
Dolores Fuller,
who, I mean, spoilers, anyone out there, was only okay with Ed being a cross-dresser for so much. Kind of thing, because wasn't it a thing she didn't really understand, like, how into it he was?
Yeah, I mean, we researched this such a long time ago, and then we have the movie, but yeah, I think it was a thing where he really concealed it, and then he was kind of like slowly, you know, in pieces, kind of like, you know, showing her, you know, yeah, I'm kind of into this, but she loved him, and
she was like, okay, he likes wearing my Angora sweaters around the house because he's like, oh, they feel nice and they're comfy. Okay, fine, Ed. I don't think she realized he was walking around town in her Angora sweaters and a skirt and heels. I don't think she realized that.
And then it was a thing where I think he had, you know, expressed his desires to do this. But I think it was more they're working together. That's where the relationship kind of
fractured.
Because I know that she was also helping invest his films. She was an investor, and I forgot what the fallout was.
Well, I mean, we could speculate on what it is, because I've heard various stories of her being like, of people speculating that she left him because he was a cross-dresser and she wasn't down with that and she was close-minded. I've also heard stories that she left him because Ed Wood, this is a real thing, was a very, like, heavy alcoholic. And I think even she said the cross-dressing wasn't great, but, like, I could look past that. I couldn't look past him being a handle of vodka a day man.
Yeah.
Like, that's a thing that I think is another part of the world that Ed Wood kind of exists in and creates in, is even when he got later on in his career, he could only write when he was kind of shit-faced. Like, he needed, like, he drank a lot, and it became his pathway into his creative output.
I had to look it up, because I remember we talked about it in that episode.
Yeah.
So, you know, apart with helping finance his movies, it was in Bride of the Monster, where she was supposed to star, and then when he got Loretta King, she was wealthy, and he got her to, you know, back the movie.
And that's why she left him?
He pulled the rug out from underneath her feet, and she was like, you know what? I've been here with you. You know, I've loved you. I've helped you. And, you know, you basically stabbed me in the back.
See, like, that's a thing where everyone wants to, like, paint Dolores Fuller as, like, she's a bad person because she couldn't accept Ed Wood for who he was. And it's also a thing where it's like, no, Ed Wood was a hustler. He was trying to get shit made, and, you know, he was a drinker. He was probably not the most wonderful human being to work for.
I mean, especially when they were saying, you know, closer to the end of his life, where he was mostly intoxicated.
Yeah. That oh god, we're gonna get into that once we get to the post Plan 9 discussion. Oh sweet lord. It goes into very weird and dark places, and a lot of porno writing. A lot of that. But Glen or Glenda, the the Glen or Glenda story that stars Ed Wood, that's very personal and feels like he is trying to work out on film his relationship to Dolores and try to build up that that structure, right?
Despite the Bela Lugosi stuff, the stock footage stuff, the racy stuff, Ed Wood's heart is in this movie.
Yes, and it comes through in his performance.
And you feel for the guy, and it's like, if you could just hone in on that, you've got something here. You know how to do emotion. I mean, granted, this is something that's very, close to him. But it's like, I think, had he had, maybe the proper training or just somebody along with him, a writer that could be like, that's good. Let me try to clean this up and make it, something where you could be an Oscar award-winning director.
Okay, let's be completely honest here. There's no way in hell in 1953 Glenda is winning an Oscar. But
no, but his ideas, like maybe we could, refine this and make this, substantial versus just kind of like, I don't know what I just watched. Let me watch it again.
My thinking, like based just on watching Glenda, is when Ed Wood is giving his monologue and he's talking about how much he loves Barbara and he's talking to his friend in the kitchen, and I'm like, he is the best actor in this movie, like by far. And it's because he's kind of talking from the heart and it's very personal. But I'm like, you were incredibly naturalistic here, and on the lowest of keys, like Ed Wood's not like a bad looking dude.
No.
Like, dude, if you wanted to, you could have probably gotten away with working in like B westerns or B dramas. Like he could have like had a pretty honest career as like an actor, like a supporting role.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe not winning Oscars left and right, but it's like
he could have been a working actor.
He could have been a working actor. He could have been a working talent, and it's like that's why I felt like if he had the right people to help guide him, he could have possibly moved higher up in the ranks of Hollywood in different channels, different avenues. I mean, he did write. So it's like, maybe he could have even been, a bigger writer towards the end than what actually happens.
I mean, like, let's look at that, right? Like, again, we're Glenda, his first movie, right? Which it's almost like he has the Citizen Kane idea or the Welles idea, right? Because I see parallels there where Orson Welles was like 25. He didn't really understand movies. Like he was a theater guy and he didn't know how movies were made. And that was his biggest strength. He made Citizen Kane because he didn't know what he didn't know. So he said, I want this because it's cool and interesting and I think it'll say something. And he had Greg Toland, the great cinematographer, who like nurtured that and was able to make Citizen Kane, the greatest movie in the world. Or the greatest movie critically, according to a bunch of stuffy nerds. And then Ed Wood Jr. is like, I'm going to make a movie, and I don't really know how to make a movie. I've been around it a lot. I love movies, but I want to make a movie that's very personal to me. It's something I've wrote myself. It's something I'm going to star in, like Orson Welles. And I want it to be very personal. And I don't know what I don't know, but I want there to be things in there that are very like, he has a vision, right? And he's trying to put that vision on screen. The issue is he has none of the money. He has none of the studio backing. He has none of the just... I would even say he doesn't have that raw eye. Like that raw director eye that Welles had. And it's probably the thing where it just doesn't click altogether. But there's certainly like diamonds in this movie. It's just under so much like janky structure that it doesn't hold all together.
I mean, chaos too.
So much chaos.
Lots of chaos with the stock footage.
Is the stock footage the part that just rips you right out of this movie?
Yeah, because it's like we're getting somewhere. We're actually having plot and story and emotion, and then stock footage. Like no.
Well, and I think people are like, okay, so they used like a stock photo of like the street or whatever. Why are you so mad? No, it is like whole sequences or stock footage. There's one sequence that I wanted to talk to you about. There's a whole sequence where there's stock footage of, I think it's the LA streets, a steel mill, a forge, and there's just dialogue of these two dudes just chit-chatting about trans people. And it's not like in a thing where it's like, oh, can you believe that? It's like, man, it must be pretty brave to do that, to really become yourself. And it's like, you know what, Chuck, working here at the steel mill, I think you're right. And it's like the most idealistic conversation that
Mm-hmm.
two good old boys could have about this issue. And it's all over stock footage. And it's like fascinating
Mm-hmm.
because it's like Ed Wood knows what he wants to say. He doesn't, it's almost like he doesn't have the vocabulary to say it. And he has like an understanding of film,
Mm-hmm.
but not a full understanding of film language. And that's why this is fascinating as a piece of like outsider art. Like I think the part that really like gets into this is the dream sequence, right?
Yeah.
Where this really, because it's a silent piece. There's
Mhm.
no dialogue really. There's some voiceover of Bela Lugosi kind of having a grand old time doing Bela Lugosi things, but the dream sequence is very just of the mind. It reminds me of like David Lynch. It
Mhm.
reminds me of like Buñuel and Dali, like Chien Andalou. That it reminds me of those Dada pieces where it's just somebody's like, I put my dream journal on the screen and it's all the weird idiosyncratic things that happen in them
Mhm.
where, oh, when I'm dressed as Glenda, I can't lift the tree off of Barbara, but when I'm dressed as Glen, I can lift the tree. But when society comes down on me as Glen and I transform into Glenda, then I'm more powerful, I'm more sure of myself.
Mhm.
And also when we get married, the devil shows up and anoints the wedding, and I'm like, why is the devil there? What the fuck? And then it's shit like that where I'm like, what in the world or am I watching? Like,
You're watching all the thoughts that are bouncing around in his head. You're watching, the I love her, I want to marry her, but I'm guilty that,
I've lied to her.
I've lied to her instead of, going to her first and telling her, "Hey, this means something to me. You also mean something to me, but I don't want to lie to you. I don't want to trick you into thinking, Glenn's just being quiet instead of, Glenn's dying on the inside because he wants to be Glenda."
And it's an incredibly fascinating thing
Mhm.
to see this because it's basically biographical, right? As far
Mhm.
as we know, this is just Ed Wood trying to process his own feelings
Mhm.
in the most, purely cinematic way. And I'm like, this is fascinating. Because, I mean, like Lynch, right? I really like David Lynch. You, I think, enjoy some of the movies, but not all of it.
Yeah, I enjoy some of his work. I mean, a lot of it is just because it's surreal. You don't always understand what's going on. So I think that's what gets me sometimes because I'm just like, I think I got it. And then it's like, no, it really meant this. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like I thought I was, on the right path. And it's like, no,
Well,
you're still at the bus stop back there. Like, no.
well, that's kind of the thing I'm getting at, right? I really like David Lynch movies because they are vague in that way. And it feels like we're just seeing inside David Lynch's
Mhm.
mind as he's working out these, like, noir stories or these,
Eraserhead,
or, yeah, Eraserhead,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, I can see why David Lynch really likes Glen or Glenda because
Mhm.
this feels like almost a prototype of, like, the David Lynch style of surrealism transposed, but it's incredibly personal, but it's very vague. Like you can read into some things. Like the whole devil thing is like, does Ed Wood view his I wouldn't call it quirk, like
His desires.
his desires or whatever as like satanic? Does he view himself being a crossdresser as evil?
Well, I think it's, part of the time period too, where you have people where, I mean, granted,
It's fucking 1953.
it's the 50s, so yeah, they are saying, this is evil, this is satanic. But then I was thinking of, modern day 2024, we still get that from people that are, this is evil. And it's like, what century are you living in? And that's why, yeah, it makes sense where he's kind of, tying this into, I'm doing this evil thing, or, it's an evil deed, an evil thought. And it's like,
society views it as evil.
and because it's printed on newspapers, he's, in the back of his head, I'm doing something wrong, when it's like, no, you're not doing anything wrong. This is just, a desire of yours. This is something that you're hardwired with. And it's like, you shouldn't be shunned because you feel more comfortable, in a certain set of clothing.
Again, progressive as hell for 1953.
Yeah, that's why it was so shocking. It's like, you have something here. It's just all the other stuff that you're kind of like, what is going on?
Yeah, and the whole it's very fascinating, and that's why I can't discount the movie. Like it as like, okay, it's a movie, first attempt, worst attempt, he'll get better later, but it's a thing where it's like there is something so like raw and primordial here for like an artist that I'm like, how in the world does Ed Wood become so comfortable in just cutting his psyche open and putting it on the screen? Where I feel like that should be something that's like acquired, especially for the era. Because I guess no surprise, the 1950s were one of the most repressive eras of film history. It's kind of the reason why if you look into great works of cinema, most of them are not in America during the 1950s. And it's like, I can see why, after the war, everyone wants to get back to normalcy and everything's very, like, tightly controlled and da-da-da-da-da. But, like, how in the world does Ed Wood think, I'm going to do this and throw it on the screen and it'll like, play? Because I feel like he has to be confident people, like, vibe on this, right?
Well, I mean, watching the Ed Wood movie, the Tim Burton one, the one that we feel like is the truest biopic of the man.
I suppose.
The dude, his secret power, his superpower was his confidence. Yeah. It's like, how many times was he rejected and, booted out of places or, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. And he goes, okay, I'll try better next time. Instead of, falling into a pit of despair, quitting, it was always, all right, I'm going to pick myself back up and we get back to work.
Yeah.
There might be no money, nowhere to shoot. We might have to film this in someone's backyard, but I'm getting my vision on the screen.
It's fascinating. It's one of those, it's kind of the reason why we want to do Ed Wood is just because the type of person to make the movies he made, the way he made them, with the confidence he made them, is a fascinating character. And, we're trying to decipher, like the caricature of Ed Wood and the man that was Ed Wood, and then the artist that is Ed Wood, right? But, like we can go around and around and around about like how the movie plays, but let's move on from the dream sequence to the next part of the movie with Alan, or Alan or Anna, who is basically the Christine Jorgensen story, which is in and out in 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Even less.
It's like a blink of an eye.
Fucking Ed Wood's producer was probably so fucking pissed. He's like, I paid you to make this story that's fucking 10 minutes, if that, and you made this whole other thing about something I did not have any care for, and also, it's fucking awful. Because, again, we can talk about the artistic integrity. Like, the movie is not shot very well, and it's not composed very well. It's a pretty amateuristic, like, production.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're a producer, you're, like, doing a bump of coke because it's 1953 and you're an American, goddammit. And you're like, what the hell is this? The Alan Anna story is interesting because that one is actually about a transgender person and not, like, a person who is a cross-dresser. And this is where I think the lengths in which Ed Wood went starts to fall apart a little bit is when he tries to wrap up the stories, right? Because there's the whole thing where the psychologist is talking to the detective, and the detective's like, well, are they like hermaphrodites? Like, no, there's a hermaphrodite and a pseudo-hermaphrodite. And what Alan was a pseudo-hermaphrodite. He had male blah, 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 but he also had a little bit of female blah, blah, blah. So he could choose and this and that. And I'm like, that is not how that works at all. Or, I mean, I guess it kind of could work, but I don't think every trans person is like that. Just saying.
No.
And then there's also the thing where, oh, well, Glen, he got over it because he just made Barbara his Glenda, and Glenda took over the womanly role, and he was able to adapt. And I'm like, Okay, Ed,
I was like,
you
no.
had me until you tried to wrap this story up in a neat bow and give the crowd I don't know, a happy ending?
Mm-hmm.
Like I guess they're like happy endings because like, oh, Glenn and Barbara got together and
Yeah.
Alan is now, happy and safe in their as their true self. But his explanations for them are very wrapped up in that 1953 mentality
Mm-hmm.
of, well, as long as, you're this kind of person, then you can be a quote unquote normal person. But if you're this kind of person, then you can quote unquote transform yourself into being your true self as this kind of person. It's very weird.
And it's like, Doc, you should know nobody's normal. We're all, we're all different. That's how we're supposed to be. We're people. It's like we're not drones. We're people with hearts and emotions and feelings and desires and dreams.
And that's what Ed Wood harps on
Mm-hmm.
through most of the movie is this happens all over the world to many different kinds of people, and you could be this and that, and it's like a cultural, and it's not just a cultural thing, it's like a human thing. It's a thing where he's so sympathetic and honest and true and full of his like this, and then the ending comes around and he wraps it up in a way that is very like confusing and like based in some very odd pseudo-scientific stuff that was probably like true science, quote unquote true scientific material for 1953.
For the 50s, yes.
But it's also a thing where I'm like, Ed, you kind of got you got an hour in and then you're rolling right back in the last 5 minutes.
And that's, my biggest gripe is that I felt if he had the right people around him, he could have had, a real gem with this. Granted, if it stayed a B movie, but it was like, wow, this movie has a lot of...
Well, let's be honest. This was a Z movie. This was the B's of the B's.
No, but I mean, with the message with, with Glenn and his struggles. Mm-hmm. It's like there's so much emotion and there's so much heart and there's heartbreak there that it's like, yeah, you could have really had a strong drama. Whether it was a B movie, a C movie... a movie that people could go back to and, wow, even back then, people were struggling with problems that we still have today. And it's just, I think with Ed's love of horror movies and, his ideas, I think it just kind of bogged the message a little bit.
I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because the movie is... Okay. I don't know if I'm not going to call it a good movie. There's so many like structural problems with it and like production problems with it. The dialogue's not very good either.
I ended up liking it a lot more than I thought I was going to.
See, that's the same with me, right? I like the movie a lot because I think its ideas, identity, and themes are very strong. I think there's a very... Like, the dream sequence part is, like, there's an artistic vision to all this. There's intent to all this. This isn't just, like, shit for shit's sake. There's intent behind it, and I like that. But it's kind of a thing where I don't know what Ed Wood could have had to make this a better movie, because he wrote the script, and, my... I guess like this is like a philosophy thing I've come across is your script can be as good as you can make it, right? Like the good dialogue doesn't cost you money, and the dialogue in this is clunky and weird and funky, like, and also like he was dictating all the performances, and some of the performances are very wooden and stilted and strange, which you can only get so much with some clunky dialogue. So I see what you're saying. Like, there's so much here. There's some good messaging, a diamond in here. If only Ed Wood had things around him that to make it good. But I'm like, what could he have gotten to make this better?
I mean, definitely better funding. Definitely a team.
Well, that's the problem. It's 1953. No one's gonna give him a lot of money for this except for like Z grade producers. It's kind of a thing where he was making a movie that would have probably done much better in a progressive and forward-looking like 60s and 70s American Hollywood. This definitely could have like I think that's the thing, is he's making a movie probably like 20 years ahead of the curve.
Probably even further.
Probably, right?
Maybe 80s, early 90s.
I see, if he could have definitely made it in the 80s and 90s when like homosexuality just becomes a more like known and acceptable thing.
Yeah.
Like he probably could have gotten around with that, but like making this in 53 is a very like uphill battle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're going to get into it when we see his other films for the month that are more like, I guess, more representative of his filmography, because this is kind of the outlier, right?
Yeah.
This is the I guess you can say like they're all personal to him, right? But this is the one for him movie.
Yeah, this is Ed's movie versus the other ones where, Bride of the Monster, Plan 9.
They're made for money. They're made for an audience of drive-throughs, and they're interesting, very interesting.
They're made for fun.
Yes, but do we have any final big thoughts on Glen or Glenda while we're here?
Oh, well, something I did want to mention was, obviously there's no sequel to this movie, but there are written sequels that he did create for the movie.
Oh, yes. I was hoping we would talk about these.
Because he was a writer.
Yes, famously, so this is, I think in the 60s or 70s. It was after he stopped directing movies. He retired as a director, and Ed Wood was apparently incredibly fast. He could write, I think, the average was 120 pages in a weekend.
Wow.
Like, he could write very quickly, and how it worked back in the day is you would write, your 120-page pulp novel, and you would sell it to some publisher or whatever, and they'd pay you like $100 for the rights. Again, this is like the 70s or whatever. You can make a living like that. But Ed Wood would have to polish off a six-pack before he started writing, but he wrote, I think it's like 140 novels under assorted names. I have never read any of them. I would love to get my hands on them.
Which I'm surprised, because, you love to read. You also love pulp novels.
Well, some of them you can get a hold of, but again, he wrote a lot under pseudonym, so you can't really tell which ones are his. But yeah, I'd be very interested to get a hold of one of these. But I know there are like the sequels, but what are the names of said sequels?
So let's see. So directly after Glen or Glenda, the sequel is Killer and Drag, where he becomes a serial killer.
Oh my.
And then after that, it is Death of a Transvestite, where he gets executed.
Yeah. Man, the hopeful ending of Glen or Glenda really goes downhill.
That's why I was like, well, let's stick with just Glen or Glenda.
I mean, you could also, here's a little fun fact for you, that Glen or Glenda still lives on in the Chucky universe, because in Seed of Chucky and Tiffany's child is named Glen, but he is gender fluid and also goes by Glenda.
Oh my god, you just broke the fourth wall.
Yeah, you didn't realize that?
Oh no, I didn't realize that. I mean, it's also been such a long time since I've watched Seed of Chucky, but as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my god, I remember that. And it went right over my head, because Seed of Chucky, I'm going to have to look it up to see how old I was when Seed of Chucky came out.
Oh god. Well, here's the thing, because the producer of those Chucky movies, it's not like a thing where it's just like, oh, because of this, that's why. No, he's a gay film producer, and he likes putting in references to films of like LGBTQ plus films and filmmakers and stuff like that. Like that's why John Waters has a cameo in Seed of Chucky.
Makes
right?
sense.
He made the movies with Divine, and he's like a very open and very like LGBTQ activist and all this stuff. John Waters. So it's a thing where he's like, let's name him Glen or Glenda, because
Glen or Glenda.
Glen or Glenda is like probably one of the earlier LGBTQ plus films. Definitely one of the early like trans films you could put into the canon, right?
I mean, Seed of Chucky came out in 2004, so I would have been around 13. So yeah, went right over my head. But look at Dean showing up with some Dean facts.
Dean has facts every once in a while. But yeah.
Wow.
Also,
I'm thinking about that all day now.
Also, we're recording this so in June, so happy Pride Month, everybody. This is our Pride Month episode. Glen or Glenda, salut.
I mean, I also wanted to go to Pride in Hollywood.
Mhm.
They had the parade this past weekend from when we're recording this.
Mhm.
But, oh my god, the traffic was so bad, apparently. I don't think we would have made it.
Oh, God, yes.
They shut down, I think, parking at Amoeba. So they were telling people that, like, you're going to have to park, further into the city. So I was like, oh, no, we wouldn't have made it. We would have been stuck.
Everyone's like, oh, yeah, we're going to have a wonderful time. We're going to a parade in L.A. And I'm like, guys, L.A. is not built for parades. The parking in the streets there are so fucking awful for parades.
I mean, it was cool, though, because they did shut down the streets. So you were able to, like, cross in front of Amoeba and, everywhere, like, on Sunset. Something like that would have been awesome. But it's just, yeah, traffic is really bad here.
Yeah.
As shown in Glen or Glenda.
And shown in Glen or Glenda. It all ties back,
It's
baby.
like from the dawn of time, traffic here in LA has just been terrible.
It all ties back together, baby. So yeah, Glen or Glenda, final thoughts. I guess to go with a thing, do you think based off of Ed Wood's first movie, is he a bad director? Because that's the question of the month. Is Ed Wood actually a bad director? Is he a bad filmmaker?
I think I'm conflicted because he has so much heart that it's like I don't want to knock him more than he already has.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say he's a diamond in the rough?
There's something there that you like, but it's definitely not fully formed.
Yeah.
Okay, I could get behind that.
I mean, what was it USC or was it UCLA where part of their film program is they do like an Ed Wood Film Festival where the students recreate like his films?
Yeah, I think it's like USC. They'll take like either Ed Wood scripts and they give them to like students or whatever. And it's like, do a scene from Ed Wood because they're meant to be like super fucking cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Wood did these for basically no money. And it's like, if you can turn an Ed Wood scene and make it like quote unquote good, then that's like, a sign of merit, right? But I would agree, Ed Wood is a very interesting and fascinating artist.
Mm-hmm.
As an artist, I'm incredibly interested.
Yeah. As a
director, he has issues. Like,
Yeah.
the scenes are shot very flat in a lot of cases. Like, you can tell they're in the back of a warehouse in a lot of them. You can, like, the performances are stilted, but he's very naturalistic. So I think it's a thing where, based solely off Glen or Glenda, I'm interested in Ed Wood as an artist. I'm not convinced of his directorial abilities.
Yeah.
So that is where I fall on.
I'll agree with you because, I mean, he is an artist, and I think that's what we get with this movie. And it's just, everything that's bouncing around in his head, his worries, his dreams, and he's kind of putting it up there on the screen, and it's like, okay, so this is what's, this is my internal monologue right now.
Yeah, this is my id on the big screen.
Yeah, so it's like, that's fascinating. But, with scenes where they're kind of flat, the performances, where it's just kind of like, we're just saying things to say things to each other, and it's like, you don't feel like they're, acting them out and, feeling the true raw emotions that they should be feeling.
Which, I mean, let's be honest, 1953, it's like, okay, I need you to have a very honest and open and naturalistic conversation about you as a trans person. And the stock worker that you probably got in yesterday to play this part is like, the fuck? That's what this movie's about? I mean, okay, I'll give it the college try. So, Glen, I like heels. Like, it's very rough, is the movie.
Yeah, so I mean, it has its issues. I mean, obviously set design because this was probably made on like, a $5 budget.
It was made with less money than the movie I made, probably.
So it's like, it has its issues, but its message is very strong. And I give it to him that he was brave enough to make this movie at a time where people were, killing people for, just them trying to be them.
Yeah. And I think that's where we end up here. Inconclusive if he is a great director or not, but as an artist, he is worth watching.
He is an artist.
But next week, we will see a movie. Another Ed Wood film. Him evolving as an artist.
Yes.
Him evolving as a filmmaker. And this will be where we can hopefully conclusively devise if he is in fact a good director or not. And what movie will that be?
Well, it's a movie, another one I haven't seen, but I'm excited to see this one. It is Bride of the Monster.
That's right, Bride of the Monster, which actual stars, Bela Lugosi, as well as Tor Johnson.
That's right.
The Swedish Superman? Dun, dun, dun. But yeah, very excited for that one next week.
I mean, we're not just excited because, Bela Lugosi, Tor Johnson, monsters. It's also our 200th episode.
That's right, everybody. It is our 200th episode, and we're going to be doing Ed Wood's Bride of the Monster. Not fucking Plan 9 because we budgeted poorly, but Bride of the Monster, which I think is, good, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a Lugosi movie. Bela Lugosi comes up a lot in our podcast for some reason. Even when he's not in the movie, he just gets mentioned.
I love him.
I know.
He's the Hungarian hunk.
Oh, God, that man was 50 when he became famous.
Doesn't matter. I still love him.
But yeah, and it's also a thing where Ed Wood is a fascinating case study as, a filmmaker, and I think it'll make interesting conversation. I don't think we're sure yet or not if we're going to do something special for 200, like a Q&A or something like that afterwards, but... yeah, look out for episode 200, Bride of the Monster. But if you wanted to check that out, where can they go?
If you want to listen to us on a different platform than you currently are, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.
You can go to our YouTube channel, The Film Vault. That is The Film Vault on YouTube, where you can like, comment, and subscribe to see the video versions of this podcast. And I should, by the time this comes out, be completely synced up. So these will be actually released more or less either the day of or the day after.
That's going to be so
the
weird.
Spotify. I know. It'll be so fucking weird. But if you want to know when things are releasing, what we're doing, where can they check us out on social media?
You could go to Instagram and follow us at the Film Club Podcast, where we post upcoming episodes, random adventures we go on, memes. We love our memes at the Film Club. And, yeah.
And with that,
we'll see you next week at the Film Club.
Have a good week, everybody.